So today we're going to be looking at North Carolina geography, which at this point should be pretty familiar to you because you've already done some work with your North Carolina maps in class. But we're going to look more at some of the specific features of North Carolina geography. As we're doing this, I want you to keep in mind this essential question, which you will see again. And this essential question is, what geographic features influenced pre-colonial North Carolina? So you're thinking about what influenced the Native Americans. You're thinking about what influenced those explorers who were coming into the United States for the first time. And then what also influenced where some of those peoples decided to make their settlements. So just some basic facts about North Carolina geography that most of us are aware of, but just a quick reminder. We are located in the southeastern United States. Our borders or our boundaries include Virginia to the north, Tennessee to the west, Georgia and South Carolina to the south, and it's just a little teeny tip of Georgia that we're talking about here, and then the Atlantic Ocean to the east. Our widest east-west point is over 500 miles. It makes us a very wide state. And then the north-south point, the largest point there, is about 180 miles. We cover about 53,000 square miles. It's the same size as the country of England. And we're also known as a South Atlantic state. So one of the terms that I want you to keep in mind throughout this is what geography is. And for the most part, you've studied geography in your previous social studies classes, but we're looking at it a little bit more specifically this year. So to really understand geography, one of the big things I know you did in 7th grade that drove some of you crazy was these word parts. So the word geography is made up of geo and graph, which means that the definition is the study of the earth. So keep that in mind when we're looking through all of our geography, what it actually means. So North Carolina is divided into 3 major regions, and then there's one smaller subregion, and that subregion is actually towards the coastal plain. So for our studies, we're going to be looking at it as the coastal plain and the tidewater regions. Some characteristics of the coastal plain, and a lot of you have been to the beach, so you probably recognize some of these characteristics. It's located between the Atlantic Ocean and the fall line. And the fall line is that line that divides the Piedmont region and the coastal plain. And they call it the fall line is because technically it is the last point in North Carolina that you see water moving downhill. So it stops going downhill at that point. The coastal plain is the largest region in North Carolina. It covers about 45% of the state's landmass. And when you look at it on a map, which we will do in class, you're going to see it really does take up a big chunk of North Carolina's landmass. Elevations, which means the height above sea level, ranges from right there at sea level to up to 400 or 500 feet. One of the things that you're going to notice about North Carolina geography is that our elevation increases as we go westward, decreases as you go east. So like I earlier mentioned, it's divided into 2 sections, that intercoastal plain and the tidewater region. So we're going to look at the tidewater region first. It is basically the border line is the ocean, and then it goes between 20 and 30 miles inland. Anything on a North Carolina map that you are seeing that touches the Atlantic Ocean or the Sounds is considered to be a part of the tidewater region. The big characteristic of the tidewater region is the Outer Banks, which are those barrier islands that if you're going to the beach, you're going to the Outer Banks usually. Some of the characteristics include capes, and capes are those areas of those Outer Banks or those barrier islands that stick out into the ocean. Examples, Cape Fear, Cape Hatteras, Cape Lookout. And you will recognize those capes because for the most part they have lighthouses on them. And those lighthouses were there in order to protect ships from running aground to those islands because the water around those islands can be very shallow. So the boats or the ships back in the old days didn't have the lights on them, so it was very difficult for them to see exactly where it is they were going. So there were a lot of shipwrecks off of the coast of North Carolina, so we installed those lighthouses eventually to help with that. For that reason, the Tidewater region, areas of the Tidewater region are known as the graveyard of the Atlantic. And like I mentioned earlier, that's because those shallow waters cause the ships to run aground very quickly. And then the lighthouses we just talked about. So other characteristics of the Tidewater region, you heard me mention those sounds, and there are 5 major sounds in North Carolina. And we've got the Currituck, the Albemarle, the Pamlico, the Core, and the Bogue sounds. And we will look at those on a map in class as well. So those are those big bodies of water that are not the Atlantic Ocean, but are in between the rest of the coastal plain and those barrier islands. Those sounds are nearly tideless bodies of water, so you don't see the tide changing as much as you might when you're at the ocean. And they're made of brackish water, and brackish water is a combination of salt water and fresh water. Fresh water is coming down from the mountain streams, and the salt water, of course, is coming from the Atlantic Ocean. Some major towns that are located in the Tidewater region: Morehead City, New Bern, Edenton, Wilmington, Southport, and Washington. One of the things that you're going to note about those towns is that those were some of the first settlements that were actually big in North Carolina. A couple of those were actually capital cities at one point along the way as well. So then we're going to move into the intercoastal plain. And that's about 70 to 100 miles wide from the Tidewater all the way to the Piedmont region, which is where we are, that fall line again. It contains really sandy soil, and that soil makes the coastal plain, the intercoastal plain, a really, really prime agricultural region. And agriculture, or farming, is a really, really big part of the North Carolina industries. The main crops are tobacco, cotton, corn, and wheat. Common livestock that you might see are beef and dairy cattle. You're going to see chickens, and you're going to see a whole lot of pork or pigs along the way as well. We also have the sandhills in the intercoastal plain, and that's the southern intercoastal plain. The sandhills are great for golf courses, so that's where Pinehurst is, and Southern Pines is down there as well. It's also got one of the state's largest military bases, Fort Bragg, which is in Fayetteville. So that's the area that's known as the Sandhills, and that's actually considered to be a part of the coastal plain, despite the fact that it's so close to us in Raleigh. So major towns of the intercoastal plain, like I just said, Fayetteville, which is where Fort Bragg is located, Goldsboro, Wilson, Southern Pines, Greenville, Rocky Mount, and Pinehurst are all some of those big cities, big towns now that are located in the intercoastal plain. Now, the population of those cities or towns has really decreased over the past 20 to 30 years because of tobacco regulations, and then just the kind of a slip in the farming industry in general, which we'll talk about some in class, and we'll talk about when we talk about North Carolina economy as well. So the Piedmont region, or the middle portion of the state, it's located between that fall line and then the Blue Ridge Mountains. And the start of the Blue Ridge Mountains is the start of the mountain ranges. It stretches about 200 miles. It's another large area. It covers about 39% of the state's total landmass. Elevations range from 500 to 1,500 square feet. There are lots and lots of rolling hills throughout this region. It's the center of the state's urban population, which means that for the most part, the Piedmont region has the larger cities that are in North Carolina. Major cities include Raleigh, Charlotte, Greensboro, Winston-Salem, and Durham, which we know are not only large cities, but they're centers for higher education and cultural activities as well. And before 1841, the Piedmont region was actually one of the most successful regions when it came to mining gold. That's why there is a federal mint that is now located in Charlotte, and a federal mint actually coins the money that is distributed throughout the United States. It also has a very rich clay soil, and that clay soil can be used for a variety of things. And it's kind of helped us with our manufacturing in North Carolina as well. Okay, and then our last one is the mountain regions. And that's located between the Piedmont and Tennessee to the west. Covers about 6,000 square miles. It's one of the smallest regions, or it is the smallest region. This is where you're going to see some very, very increased elevations from 1,500 feet all the way up to 6,684 feet. And that 6,684 feet is Mount Mitchell. And Mount Mitchell is the highest peak in the eastern United States, so it's a great place to go see. Many of you have probably actually been there. The region is about 200 miles long and 15 to 20 miles wide. And one of the only Native American reservations in North Carolina, or the only Native American reservation in North Carolina, the Cherokee Reservation, is located in the mountain region. And we'll talk about that some in class and how those laws on those Cherokee reservations can be different than the laws that we see typically. Asheville is the largest city, and you see the state's largest national parks there, Pisgah and Nantahala. Have a great one, guys.